Well, and the ones that didn't vote for your bills but run on them.
That's right.
Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's
great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere. It's a very exciting day around here. We'll have reaction and analysis to everything we just heard.
I am very excited. My friend Kyle is here. Kyle Anzalone. He is the news editor at the Libertarian Institute and then the opinion editor at antiwar.com. He's also the host of the show Conflicts of Interest and the Kyle Anzalone Show, which you can find wherever you find shows. And then, of course, you can check out his Twitter page, which I will show you here. It is at Kyle Anzalone _ ANZALONE. And then there's the two shows. Go subscribe while you're at it. So let's bring Kyle in here. Hey, my friend. It's good to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I'm very excited. So Kyle, if you guys ever used to watch my old TNT show or whatever, Kyle was a regular guest. He used to be my every Monday guest. We've had lots of conversations about really terrible stuff. Kyle doesn't ever bring
getting freed. So
that's
there
true.
was one good news story that we have talked about.
Fair. That's fair. That is fair. That was the one. I think that's it. It's the only good news I can really think of recent times, but it is what it is. So I wanted to have you on because there's a lot of foreign policy stuff and you do a great job of covering a wide range of topics. So I wanted to start, if we could, with Russia, Ukraine. Okay. So this is an issue that you and I have unfortunately been talking about for a long time, really since day one. You recently wrote a piece. Let's start first. You wrote a piece detailing a July 4th conversation between Trump and Zelensky. So tell us about the significance of that call and what was said.
Yeah, Misty, this is absolutely crazy. And, it is anonymous sources. It is the Financial Times. So we could take it with a grain of salt. But it sounds an awful lot like something Trump is saying. And so what they explain is on this call, Trump asked Zelensky if Ukraine could hit Moscow or St. Petersburg. So the two most important Russian cities, right? And two cities very far, no, I guess Moscow not very far, but St. Petersburg certainly very far from the front lines. And so Zelensky said, absolutely, if you give us the weapons. I guess the only little bit of relief in this story is the Trump administration is apparently not willing to budge on the Tomahawk. These are cruise missiles that were previously capable of carrying a nuclear weapon. And so Russia views, their presence in Eastern Europe in general, but especially in Ukraine, is highly provocative. But long-range drones and plenty of other weaponry that we have that could probably hit those two cities. And so I think it's a real concern that Donald Trump floated this. Maybe he wasn't serious. Maybe he wasn't actually giving Zelensky the thumbs up on this, but that he would float this in a call with Zelensky, who may take it seriously, even if Trump doesn't intend it to be. If Zelensky takes it as a green light, this is a major concern. Now, the part of the conversation, that's one of the really important parts of the conversation also is what I think is a very clear, true statement where Trump told Zelensky that he wants Ukraine to carry out strikes deeper into Russian territory. And Trump said the purpose is he wants to make Moscow feel the pain of the war. And that's certainly the kind of negotiating tactics Trump likes, right? He doesn't want to negotiate on an evil playing field, or in the case of Ukraine, at a disadvantage, because the Russians had the advantage on the battlefield. The Ukrainians are going to have to concede a lot to end that war. He wants to feel like he has the upper hand. And I think Trump's path to doing that is going to be more and more Ukrainian attacks inside of Russia.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Trump does deny this, of course. Publicly, he's denying it, that this is something that he said. But this is totally something I think he would say, right? I mean, that's what you just said. This is exactly how he operates. And of course, we don't know for sure, but I could totally see this at least being something that he floats, right? And you're right, he may not be serious, but I'm not really sure that matters.
Right.
So, but just strategically and militarily, Russia has been very patient, right? You and I have discussed that many times. They have really held their. So how do you see Russia reacting to just even the conversation that's being had, or that this is being floated, whether it was leaked or whatever? And how do you think that they would react to such an attack? Because that's obviously a major act of aggression, not something they're going to just look the other way on.
Right. Well, I think it's important to remember Ukraine recently launched Operation Spiderweb, and there were a lot of people concerned that Russia was going to really, maybe even go for decapitation strikes in Kiev. And at the time, I had a conversation with our friend Pasta Jardula, and I told him that I thought, Russia may accelerate the war, and we've seen that Russia carrying out larger and larger drone barrages in Ukraine. Once it was, 100 Russian drones was a large attack. Now we're seeing daily attacks of 4, 5, 6, a largest attack over 700 drones and missiles Russia fired at Ukraine one night. And so, yes, Putin has accelerated the war, but, not in a way that's capturing headlines in the United States, not in a way that's, I think, really changing the Russian overall strategy. As you said, we've talked about Russia, the Kremlin being willing to be patient. What we mean by that is winning a war of attrition at a way where Russia isn't sustaining a lot of blows to their side, right? They're not going on dangerous missions in order to take out a lot of Ukrainian soldiers. They're being very conservative in how they approach these missions. And so it means that the Russians aren't taking a lot of territory, but that's not the game that Putin is playing, right? He's trying to, at the least cost he can to the Russian military, cause the collapse of the Ukrainian military. And I think once that happens, he's going to just force Zelensky to negotiate at the barrel of a gun. That the Ukrainians really won't have a choice or a say in the matter, neither will the rest. Whatever the terms of Russia imposes on Ukraine are what they are. I hope he's not too extreme in what he takes, but he might be. He might impose a soft puppet government in Kiev and kill awful lot of Ukrainians who he feels are too tied to the nationalist and neo-Nazi parties of Ukraine. It could get very, very ugly in Ukraine if the U.S. continues to go down the road of escalating this conflict and continuing to support Kiev rather than going to Zelensky and saying, look, the American and European weapons are coming for another 90 days. After that, I'm pulling the plug on this thing. So you better make a deal with Putin now while you still get to make some concessions, where you still get to tell Vladimir Putin, no, you don't get all of Eastern Ukraine, and other concessions like Ukraine getting to hold their own elections in the future and not having a Moscow appointing sock puppet in Kiev, which again, I think is a highly likely scenario if we keep pushing forward here. And I think that, that's the road that Putin sees himself going down at this point.
I mean, but that's it though. We are pushing towards that. This right. Could have, it didn't ever have to get this far. You know what I'm saying? And we all know that. Like it's clear that this is just exactly what we intended for it to be, and we're just trying to get as much out of it as we can. But it's just very frustrating to watch because we are, as I've said many times, watching an entire generation of Ukrainian men and some women being sacrificed on the altar of Western imperialism, which is a very frustrating thing to watch that play out. And as you just said, Putin's probably just waiting to break the Ukrainian military. They're not far. It's not like they're struggling, right? You've covered that numerous times. The Ukrainian military is not in great shape.
Right. No, that's absolutely the case. I think at this point, even more so than the manpower issue is the weapon supply issue and how many weapons the United States could get to Ukraine. And of course, I'm not talking, we're sending billions and billions of dollars of arms to Ukraine. And so they have tanks and armored personnel carriers and some small drones, small arms. But, there's particular shortages of important weapons. So, longer range rockets, the ATACMS that we've heard so much about, or even the HIMARS, particularly the 155 millimeter artillery rounds. I mean, these were running out under the Biden administration, and we are deploying the cluster form of this. And so, of course, I guess at that time, Washington must have known that they were never going to take back Eastern Ukraine, or I don't think they would have just littered the whole place with all these little bomblets that are going to cost billions of dollars and likely at least, the limbs of thousands of children over the rest of our lives, as we watch this war play out, just like Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, all these countries that were heavily hit with U.S. cluster munitions going on. But most importantly, Misty, the interceptors and the air defense systems. The West has gotten very creative. The UK designed a new Raven system where they used some of their surplus air-to-air missiles and converted these into an anti-missile system that could be launched from the ground. You know, we've had Japan give us their Patriot interceptors because the Japanese ones actually can't go to Ukraine due to their anti-war, or what was once a anti-war constitution. And so they gave the US their Patriots, which aren't being deployed, and we're using our stockpile Patriots, which are now replaced with the Japanese one. We sent those to Ukraine already. So, we've gotten creative. We scraped the bottom of the barrel. And at some point, with 700 Russian drones and missiles incoming every night, Ukraine's just not going to be able to withstand these barrages. And I think that's where we're ultimately going to see the fall of the Ukrainian military, is when Russian air superiority really takes over. They're losing F-16s. More importantly, they're losing the pilots of the F-16s because they've used a lot of air-to-air missiles out of the F-16s to shoot down targets as well.
Yeah. And I mean, Trump did just approve some limited Patriot missiles interceptors to Ukraine, though, right? So, and also, I love this story too. This is another story that you wrote for the Libertarian Institute, because Trump is now trying to say that the EU is going to pay for it, and I just keep hearing Mexico is going to pay for the wall. So, tell us about these Patriot missiles and how the EU is actually going to pay for that. Have they even agreed to these terms?
Yeah, I think he said that maybe Poland is going to pay for some, Germany is going to pay for some. But Missy, this just shows how stupid that Trump is. And you're right. Ultimately, the United States is probably going to end up paying for these missiles. But let's say that Germany or Poland does. The problem with the Patriots isn't that the United States can't pay for more. We can't build enough of them. We could only build 500 or so a year, and we just used maybe 100, but certainly dozens of them to defend Israel against Iran in the Middle East. There's a lot of people in the Trump administration, including somebody in the Defense Department named Elbridge Colby, who believe that the real coming threat is China, and that basically we're depleting our munition stockpiles fighting wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, and that's why we need to wrap these things up. And China, and this is because Taiwan is going to wait maybe another decade before they get their Patriot interceptors, because we've depleted our stockpiles, we depleted our ally stockpiles, our core NATO allies and our East Asian allies like Japan. And so whenever the new systems rolling out, they're first going to fill the American stockpiles, then they're going to go to the Germans and the British and everybody else who's bought these things, right? Maybe the Israelis will need more of them. And so Taiwan's going to be very low on the list. And I think this is maybe one of the things that's finally going to convince Donald Trump not to keep fighting this war, but he doesn't seem to understand. It's not that we're suckers for paying for this. We're suckers because we're making our country vulnerable to continue to wage a war in Ukraine that cannot be won. Every day it goes on, the Ukrainians are going to get a worse, and they're going to lose more and more men, more and more weapons. Their stockpiles are going to get lower. The Russians will take another kilometer, 10 kilometers of territory, another city, another village every maybe week, every month. Ukraine's going to be in a worse and worse and worse position. And Missy, it's me and you who for years were the ones advocating to make a deal with Vladimir Putin to end this war, to close NATO membership to Ukraine, not to send these weapons to Ukraine, to have Zelensky make a deal, who would have gotten Ukraine a far better deal under what we suggested the whole time. And we're just smeared as, Putin puppets and Russian propagandists, when we're the only ones who actually want to help the Ukrainian people and end this stupid war and have them stop dying over absolutely nothing.
Yes. And that is what's so frustrating about, we know war is a racket. Everybody knows it. Thank you, Smedley Butler. We know that war is a racket, and it's just unnecessary cruelty and viciousness and death and destruction just so that rich people can get richer, so that weapons manufacturers can rake in more money. It is astonishing to me that it's the year of our Lord 2025 and human beings still blow each other up for profit. Come on. But okay, so I wanted to ask you too about Lindsey Graham, because of course Lindsey Graham of course, Lindsey Graham comes out and he's all for it. And he's now calling for what he's calling a sledgehammer round of sanctions on Russia. So they've tried the sanctions route. Russia doesn't seem to really, I mean, obviously they're impacted, but they seem to be doing just fine, Kyle. So what does that look like? What does sledgehammer sanctions look like to Lindsey Graham?
So, yeah, this is a bill. And Misty, let me say, this bill has 85 co-sponsors in the Senate. So yeah. that means there's only 15 senators who have not co-sponsored this bill. This bill is a nuclear bomb to the American-led U.S. economic order, right? All the fact that, all trade is done in dollars, this would completely undo and unravel that. It would impose 500% tariffs on any country that does business with Russia. Now, this actually made some European countries quite nervous because some of them still import Russian natural gas. And I guess they got assurances from Washington that, no, we're going to look the other way as long as you say you're going to buy less every year. So we're giving some country passes, but countries I've heard, again, cross the board, 500% tariffs on China, India, Brazil, Turkey, many African countries. This is absolutely insane. And again, for years and years and years, this dynamic has been building where the U.S. has wielded sanctions and used them for everything, right? And especially under Trump has been the worst with his tariffs. The president of a country addresses him wrong and he slaps on 20% tariffs, or that's essentially how it's gone, right? Minor issues like a country not taking in immigrants or deportees from the United States is threatening 100% tariffs and ridiculous things like this. And so that plus the sanctions on Russia that exist already, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Zimbabwe, Syria. Well, now that Syria is run by jihadists, I guess not so much. But, all these sanctions has created an alternative economic order that's been growing. And it's kind of in two forms, BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And this, if Trump signs this bill and goes through with this, I think it would essentially lock in and ensure that either BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization really becomes like the center of world trade in the coming years, probably because countries won't go along with this anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, so I wanted to ask you too about the mega deal. So Zelensky's calling... So Zelensky's calling this, he wants to do this drone weapon swap. So talk to us a little bit about that. And then I want to kind of loop back around to the Shanghai cooperation thing.
Okay. Yeah. So the mega deal thing, this seems like another scam, just like the minerals deal, right? Where I don't think the U.S. is going to ever see any profits from mines in Ukraine. I mean, some of them are going to be in Russia very soon. One of the major, I think, lithium mines is actually in Russia's hand now. But Zelensky has this new deal he's coming to Washington with. He's calling a mega deal where the U.S. is going to buy Ukrainian long-range drones in exchange for weapons. Now, the drones that Ukraine is producing are these like cheap kind of commercial drones that they add some things to, and I'm sure some of it is like kind of complex GPS type communication device and things like that, and then ammunition, right? And then they're going to trade them to the US for Patriot missiles. So this whole thing makes absolutely no sense because it would probably be thousands and thousands of Ukrainian drones to every Patriot interceptor that we send to Kiev. And of course, my guess, Misty, is that the Ukrainian drones would not be sold to the United States until after the conflict is over, in which case they're never going to be sold to the United States. This is just a way to scam Donald Trump, thinking that the United States is getting something bad for the weapons that we're sending to Ukraine. So we're, going to get rights to minerals in territory that's seized by Russia. Right. Yeah. And we're going to sell Ukraine weapons for the stake in those minerals. I mean, this is just absolute stupidity. Right. Yes. But Donald Trump seems to be absolutely falling for it at this point. And I think this is just another scheme to send weapons to Ukraine.
Well, Kyle, Trump went from criticizing military support for Ukraine. He's going to end it in 24 hours, Kyle. He's going to end it. It's going to be over in 24 hours. Don't you worry. Here comes Donald Trump. He's going to fix everything. And now, dude is completely embracing and exploring weapons transfers, expanded weapons transfers, sanctions. The shift is fascinating, and this is not obviously the only thing that he shifted on. Hello, Epstein. We're going to talk about that later. But he has completely shifted his position on this issue, and watching MAGA try to cope with that is it's kind of fascinating to watch it play out, because some of them are. It's interesting because some very loud MAGA supporters, or at least Trump supporters, have been very vocally. I mean, they've been really going at him. I mean, which is great. It's refreshing to see. But there's also a major amount of cope, Kyle. There's so much cope going on. There's still the QAnon stuff where this is all part of the plan. Just trust the plan, bro. But what do you make of that? What do you make of his complete shift on this issue, and how his base seems to be taking that?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I thought was going to happen, Misty. I thought, the best way to predict what was going to happen, the Trump administration, was to look at his first term. And if you look at, he said a lot of great things about getting along better with Russia, like removing tariffs and sanctions on different countries, ending wars in the Middle East, making a deal with Kim Jong-un, reducing nuclear weapons stockpiles between the U.S. and Russia. These are all policies that I think me and you support. And if Donald Trump was doing those things, I probably would have voted for him the second time around. But he didn't do any of those things and actually went in the opposite direction on most of these issues. And this is the problem with Donald Trump, is that he'll take up an issue and he'll put it at the top of his list. But he only has so much attention span, and he only understands things so shallowly, right? And so I think you could kind of deal with domestic policy that way to some extent, but to negotiate a deal with Iran is going to take 6-9 months, right? It's going to involve working level talks, middle level talks, occasional meetings between Rubio and the Iranian foreign minister and things like, but it takes time. You build, you break down certain issues, right? Like there's massive bureaucracies that you're dealing with here. And so when you go and talk to a foreign country, our representatives bring back what the Russians said. We break it down. We go over it. It takes time to get that through the State Department and then to get a report on the president's desk, and then of course, sending back how we're going to respond to it. These things take a lot of time to develop, and Donald Trump just doesn't have the patience for it. It's going to require a lot of kind of fighting the consensus narrative day after day after day, because people are going to panic when he tries to do a deal with Putin, with Lindsey Graham, or with Iran or something like that, right? Lindsey Graham will be jumping up and down and sitting next to Democrats and yelling about how we have to do more and Trump is, giving too much away. And so Trump can't do that, right? He cognitively does not have the ability to navigate that process. And so when it sounds great that Donald Trump is going to go and meet with Vladimir Putin and talk about reducing nuclear weapons stockpiles and extending arms control agreements, what happens is he goes and meets with Vladimir Putin. Putin doesn't just tell Donald Trump everything that he wants to hear. He gets a lot of heat in the press back home. And what did the first Trump administration end up with as far as Russia policy goes? We had expelled over 50 Russian diplomats from the United States, imposed multiple rounds of sanctions on Russia, and maybe most importantly, Donald Trump went further than Barack Obama and actually sent U.S. arms to Ukraine, not just, trucks and things like that, like Obama was doing. He went further than Obama on that issue. And so, Misty, I think this really shows us that if Donald Trump takes up a foreign policy issue, he's actually going to make it worse because he doesn't have the ability to see it through. And then the hawks win the narrative in the mainstream press.
Yeah. What's crazy about that whole situation and Trump's positions and actual substantive policies on Russia is that all of that took place with him being very hawkish during the time of Russiagate, which is incredible that those two things could coexist at the same time, because the Russiagate that whole thing was he's owned by Putin, right? What was the book? Collusion. Oh, what's that guy's name? Oh, Aaron Matei killed him in that interview. I'm so bad at names. Oh, I wish I could remember. He's so funny. It's going to bug me. But yeah, it's the idea that he was somehow like he was just owned by Putin, and he was incredibly hawkish on Russia. Okay, but you mentioned the getting all these deals ironed out. And so I want to move to Iran because the Iranian foreign minister recently discussed the possibility of nuclear negotiations with Washington, which is insane to me to think that that's even a possibility at this point, given the fact that the United States, we cannot be trusted. Let's just be very clear on that. But tell us a little bit about what was said here and where this situation is headed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Iranians are kind of trying to draw a hard line on returning to the table. They're putting up front that they're not going to give up their nuclear enrichment program, and they're not going to engage in talks where that's one of the demands. They're saying that they want assurances from the U.S., which who knows what they would be and how you could trust them, that the U.S. or Israel wouldn't attack again if Iran returned to the table. But I think the main demand is on the nuclear enrichment. And my guess is, Misty, this is a little bit of a show or propaganda from Iran to blocs like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and Brits, who, if these countries do business with Iran, they could face retaliation from the United States. And so if Iran's, really wants to look like the good guy on the world stage, I think that's why they're offering the diplomacy here, because I think it's very likely that the U.S. and Israel end up attacking Iran again, and at least that they're offering talks, which to me as an American are perfectly reasonable. Allow Iran to have nuclear enrichment. They're not building a nuclear bomb, right? And even if they did, it would probably just balance the Middle East power between the United States and Israel and Iran, and make Israel not so belligerent and lead to less war in the Middle East, not more. But I don't want to advocate too much for nuclear proliferation.
Right.
But Iran isn't trying to build a nuclear weapon. And so we don't even need to make a deal with Iran. We could just lift the sanctions for all I care. But if we really want to have a deal with Iran, that could certainly be negotiated. But Trump isn't, again, capable of doing that. And so every time he dips his toes into negotiations, he's going to be swayed into, because Iran's going to be the top issue, and he's going to hear on Fox News all day long about how Iran is trying to build a nuclear bomb. And his as Matt Blumenthal has reported, his CIA director is essentially acting as a Mossad agent and presenting Israeli talking points to the president. An assessment that was generated by Mossad, I believe this was in the Jerusalem Post, was meant to be a political tactic for Netanyahu. Mossad did this as a favor to Netanyahu, so he would have an assessment to bring to Donald Trump that says Iran is 15 days away from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This was absolutely stupid. It wasn't true. The U.S. intelligence community said that Iran not only wasn't 15 days away from building a nuclear weapon, they hadn't even decided to build a nuclear weapon. Right. And so this is just, again, completely stupid, but it sways Donald Trump. And because he's hearing about the issue every day, he ends up taking action and allowing Israel first and then himself to go ahead and attack the Iranians. I think this is bad news. I think we're set for another conflict coming up here. I guess the Iranians know it, and they're kind of offering talks as a bit of propaganda.
Yeah, everybody knows it. I mean, I don't even think it's not a Trump thing. Like, Trump's not really making any decisions. I mean, they trot him out there to say stuff and be a distraction, really. But I think this kind of stuff is well beyond Trump. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's over Trump's head. And he's just so, I think, clueless, really, on most of these issues. But so, obviously, Iran should be able to keep their enrichment capabilities. I don't even know why that's up for negotiation. And I think it's interesting, too, because you said that you don't want to cheer too much for nuclear proliferation. But at the same time, I feel very conflicted about that, too, because Israel has nukes, right? Everybody knows it. And somehow they're allowed. And again, the idea that the United States feels like we get to be the arbiter of who gets to have nuclear weapons is beyond my ability to comprehend, given the fact that we're the only ones who have ever used them. Whatever. So, I mean, but what are some of the concrete assurances that Iran is asking out of the United States in order to return to talks?
Yeah, I haven't seen an Iranian official be extremely clear on that, other than saying that they're not going to give up their enrichment program. I guess maybe they want a public statement from the United States saying we won't attack you as long as talks are ongoing. But I don't see any value in that whatsoever. So I kind of dismiss that story as the Iranians just looking to score a point in the international press.
Yeah, I agree. Why would anybody take anything that we say seriously? Anybody ever? We are I mean, the worst liars on planet Earth. It's genuinely astonishing. We never keep any of our promises. This would be no different. It's a silly thing to even assume. So, okay, now I wanted to touch back on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization because the foreign minister actually reached out to them recently to develop a coordinated response to aggression. So tell us about this. What is SCO? What is this whole deal about?
Right. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is kind of like an economic bloc that, of course, is started by China. I think they use it to kind of facilitate their Belt and Road Initiative, which is, you know, the United States and the West does this as well. The China is taking loans and ownership of ports and things in other countries. Of course, China is getting a good deal, right? Like, you know, I don't know if I would go so far as to call it predatory or it's quite as abusive as what like the IMF has done to countries around the world. But, you know, China is certainly getting a good deal by throwing their capital around. And also they're using it to buy political favors, particularly when it comes to the Taiwan issue in different countries, maybe recognizing Taipei as independent from Beijing or not. I know they've exerted a lot of political influence to say get countries to change the flag. Like when you go to the airport and you walk through the airport, the flag on the sign that says like Taipei, to change it to the Chinese flag rather than the Taiwanese flag, which I guess for China is just like some symbolic issue of countries recognizing that Taipei is a part of China and is not an independent country. So these are like the kinds of things that China is doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. But then you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which as the U.S. has imposed sanctions on more and more countries, I think has become like a real economic world forum where countries get together and they talk about like joint development and trade deals and things like that. And they form these agreements. But the Iranian foreign minister, and I think, you know, when I talk about Iran looking to score points in the international press, I think this is where they're trying to look to cash in, Misty, and that is to make the Shanghai Cooperation Organization something that actually balances against what the United States and the world empire is doing. And so they would have specific methods and systems in place. So if the United States just blacklists and sanctions a country, that there's ways for those countries to continue to do business without going through the SWIFT bank, right? Which is kind of the US controlled economic system and how we force deals to be international deals to be done in dollars and things like that. And so that is a part of this, but they also said there should be a way for states to come and talk, a forum and a mechanism of how to respond when a member state is aggressed upon. And so I think, you know, a part of what Iran is looking for is probably just, if they're attacked, all the other countries in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization come out and say, we condemn this. This is awful. They're also probably looking weapons markets, right? That if you're not able to buy weapons from Washington, you know, China, Russia, and these other countries could potentially sell you weapons. And so when you're aggressed upon getting maybe primary access to weapons and things like that. So that's what Iran is looking to do with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry. No, I lost my train of thought. So what do you see as this moves forward and we have stuff like the SEO, it kind of seems like an alternative to NATO. That to me seems like a really bad idea. Obviously, you and I think NATO should have been disbanded a long time ago. So is the SEO on that path? What does that look like? And where are talks right now with Iran on the nuclear deal? I know that there was some talk that there was going to be sanctions at the end of August.
Yeah, so my guess is that the SCO itself is not going to become NATO-like. I think too many of the member states have issues and maybe even territorial border issues with each other. And so that would make, it hard to have a mutual defense clause for an alliance. I mean, NATO deals with this with Turkey and Greece, say, but there's no real serious conflicts between any actual NATO members. And so that's why the mutual defense pact works. I don't think that would work with the SCO. But I think we're going to continue to see Iran or not Iran, but probably Iran, but particularly Russia and China do what they've done with North Korea and Iran, where they're signing defense agreements between the two countries. I mean, Russia and North Korea effectively have a mutual defense pact at this point. North Korea actually sent its soldiers to the Kursk region of Russia when the Ukrainians invaded there. And there's, I believe, probably sincere talk about the North Koreans sending more of their soldiers to help the Russians fight, maybe even inside of Ukraine. And of course, this is mutually beneficial. The North Korean forces are going to learn how Western trained troops operate should war break out between the North Korea and South Korea, or the US and North Korea. They're going to understand NATO tactics and how NATO weaponry works, but also they're going to learn how to use Russian systems that Pyongyang may later buy from Moscow. And so they'll have battlefield tested experience on the different artillery platforms and things like that the Russians have. Iran has sent Russia a lot of drones. And so I think we're going to move closer and closer, Misty, to maybe not a formal block of countries and, was, I think, referred to as the global South, having like a military bloc alliance, but more and more of these countries having almost a spider web like alliance where, Russia has ties with Iran, North Korea, China, and a few other countries. But that doesn't necessarily mean that India is included in that, where India would have a deal with maybe Iran, or I don't know. That's kind of why I see going on.
Yeah. Okay. So before we run out of time, I want to talk about Israel, Gaza. Obviously, that's something that, I can't believe that we're still watching a genocide. And so Netanyahu recently said, and this is not shocking to anybody who's been paying attention, because Israel has never been shy about their intentions. And Netanyahu recently said that Israel would absolutely resume the war. So why do you think this? Because this drives me crazy, Kyle. Why do you think so many people are so willing to just completely overlook that? Oh, if and I can't tell you how often it happens to me on a daily basis. Oh, well, if Hamas would just return the hostages and it would all be over. No, it wouldn't. No, it would not. Right. That's not the plan here. But it seems like everybody's just so willing to overlook that. So what did he say recently? Again, out loud, in the open, in public, that there is no intention of ending this war.
Right. I mean, this is the Israeli position. It's always been the Israeli position. Even when they agreed to a 3-phase ceasefire deal that went into effect on January 19th, the Israeli government was saying we're only going to abide by the first phase of that deal. And then after that, shrug. And then they, paused the ceasefire for 6 weeks, which was phase 1 of the deal. Then they went back to war. I think if Israel does agree to a temporary pause, Misty, it's only going to be so they could clear the rubble which was once the southern city of Gaza, and then they're going to put a bunch of tents there and force first 600,000 Palestinians into the tents, and then the rest of the population of Gaza, and they're going to continue to starve them and their children and terrorize them and drop bombs on those tents until the Palestinians agree to leave. And this has been it's very important to understand, Missy, this has been the plan all along. One of Netanyahu's closest allies, Ron Dermer, he's the strategic affairs minister in Israel. He was actually born in the United States. And apparently this was reported, I want to say in Reuters, that he's a frequent guest at the White House. So he obviously has a lot to say. But right after October 7th, he came up with a plan for how to expel the Palestinians from Gaza. And he notes that the biggest problem is that a third country won't want to take the Palestinians. And of course, whenever this is said in the American press, it's always presented as because the Palestinians are somehow bad people, right? Either they're terrorists, they're all Hamas, or they're agitators, they're just, kind of, I think like some Americans would look at like Mexicans or people, they're just people that you wouldn't want to come into your country. But that's not the case. The reason the Egyptians don't want to take in the Palestinians, the Jordanians don't want to take in the Palestinians, is because the people of those countries would see it as their government facilitating the genocide. Right? If you refuse to take in the Palestinians, if they can't send them out of Gaza, then you're kind of putting up a wall that prevents the genocide of the Palestinians. And so to bypass this problem, Ron Dermer's plan was to make life in Gaza so unlivable, to destroy everything to the point where when you look out at the landscape of Gaza, that people, the Palestinians, will never live there again. Their home, their culture, their land that their families have lived on for centuries is gone. It's been utterly bulldozed. Every last mosque, school, hospital, it is all gone and destroyed. The only thing that exists there is Israeli military bases, and there are people in Rafah, and Israel is going to say, oh, there's a few members of Hamas in there, so we can only send in a little bit of food, and we're only going to allow in a few aid agencies to have their doctors in there and things like that, right? They're going to make it literally the worst place on earth to be, where children are dropping dead, and parents are going to be given the choice to continue to live in a place where they could possibly be shot and killed at any moment, bomb dropped on their head at any moment, where there's never a future prospect of a job, their children getting an education, being able to go see a doctor, right? All that is completely gone, and that the Palestinians are so beaten and broken that they finally agree to leave their homeland. That is the option that Israel is trying to inflict on Palestinians in the Arab world, and it's intentional, and it's been going on since October 7th.
Yeah, and it's infuriating to watch play out, and watching the way that people have been able to, and that's what I think is so, I think if we're going to look for a silver lining, which, listen, is not usually in my nature, I'm usually very cynical and pessimistic, but if there is a little bit of a silver lining, I think that this is no question the end of Zionism. I think that I don't think you can continue past this. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's too many people have seen it now. And prior to this, I think, and you and I may have discussed this before, but prior to this, I think Israel had a really good lock. The Zionists had a really good lock on the narrative, and you weren't really, we didn't really get to see it. But now, and a lot of it is, I mean, social media is accessible, but a lot of it is because of social media. People are live streaming what's happening in real time. And so there is no real, I mean, obviously you can still control the narrative, but things can get out. And I think that the public consciousness, there's been a shift. You can feel it happening. There's been an absolute shift in the attitudes towards Zionism in general, and Israel as a byproxy. But yeah, I think that's, if we're going to look for any kind of, I don't know if it's going to be enough to save Palestine. Probably not. I'm sorry to say that out loud, but just as a realist, probably not. As Kyle just mentioned, it's not looking good, but I do think,
and they're doing it in the West Bank too, Misty. I mean,
yes.
Obviously there's I understand, and a lot of people I think have genocide fatigue at this point, where you can't look at the pitch, like, especially for me, like the pictures of the starving children, it makes me sick. I hate it so much. Right. And, that is so telling. I'm sure you saw the clip of Matt Blumenthal asking Randy Fine about, his support for killing kids and starving kids, and how he doesn't even flinch. Right. Like, he knows this is going on. And I can't think of it without, like, it makes me mad, but it also makes me ill and just sad that this is happening with our tax dollars. And so I guess my fear, Misty, is that I think the Zionist state is actually maybe going to get away with it, because, as much as I had somebody ask me yesterday if I thought the Europeans were going to turn off their support for Israel. And I said, it doesn't matter. It only matters what happens in the U.S. But really, Misty, it only matters what happens in Washington. And Capitol Hill and the White House are effectively Israeli occupied territory at this point. And if you look at Congress right now, I think probably the most frequent way that somebody loses their seat is either like a chronic illness, or they actually die. The people don't get voted out of office. Randy Fine will probably be in that seat until he has a heart attack. And that means that we have like some crazy ultra Zionist who literally supports the killing of Palestinian children, permanently occupying one of the 400 and something seats in the House of Representatives. Right. But this is the consensus. Even Nancy Pelosi, who's from liberal San Francisco, has always said, that Israel is even more important than Washington. Like, if the Capitol is gone tomorrow, I think she said, our support for Israel will still stand. Ted Cruz, he's a senator from Texas. His most important mission, his self-stated in the Senate, isn't so helping the people of Texas, which you would think every politician would say, helping my constituents is my number one priority. He says, my number one priority is supporting the state of Israel. Like, these people are just absolutely insane lunatics. You know, I think once actually had kind of intelligent people that ran this country, Misty. And now if you look at them, they're all paranoid. They're all insane. The foreign policy debate in this country should be the debates that we see on Judge Napolitano between himself and John Mearsheimer if we need to confront China one day. But the debate is between, you know, the people who want to go to war with China versus the people who want to try to go to war with the entire globe. Russia, Iran, Venezuela, China, North Korea, they want war absolutely everywhere. They're absolutely insane. And they represent the American center, the foreign policy consensus.
Yeah, that's what's terrifying, is that is the consensus. And it's so just broadly accepted. And I'm not even sure really if it's accepted in the United States or if people just don't. I mean, you mentioned fatigue. I think some people do have some of that, like war fatigue and like the constant conflict. So there's maybe some of that. I think the vast majority of people just don't have time to pay attention. Like most people don't, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, like, oh my God, they're so dumb. I think people are working 2 or 3 jobs and have to take, you know, Billy to soccer practice and Anna to softball or whatever, and they don't have time to pay attention to all this stuff. And so they're just completely unaware. But it's, I mean, it's crazy to me how easily they're able to get away with it, as you just mentioned. And it's, see, I was trying to be positive for once, Kyle, and you shot me down.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks a lot. That's a role reversal right there. Usually I'm the negative one. But I mean, as you just mentioned, they're starving the children. There's the UNRWA report, the UNRWA, 1 in 10 Palestinian children are malnourished. And I think that's gotta, I mean, honestly, it has to be higher than that. I can't imagine it not being, I mean, I don't know what how they measure that, but it's, what they're doing in terms of starving children is so disturbing to me on every level. And again, the idea that it's happening out loud in the open, live streamed to everybody daily, and it just continues is really discouraging. You know what I mean? That's really sad. So, okay, Kyle, do you have anything coming up? Do you want to hype anything? Obviously your shows, I can pull those up again, but anything you got coming up?
I mean, nothing, no like major changes, just the daily grind, you know, trying to continue to keep up with the war state. I write at the Libertarian Institute and Judge Napolitano's website, judgenap.com. I also write occasionally at antiwar.com, where I'm the opinion editor. But if you guys could follow my show, particularly the Kyle Lanslone show, I would really appreciate it. I'm hoping that Misty will be back on very soon, and we could talk about all this, and I could get her fired up a little bit on my show this time. And you know, thank you so much for having me on, Misty. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you as always, my friend, and I would love to come back on. We were going to do it yesterday, I think, but I had other stuff going on. So soon, I will be on soon. So
sounds good.
Thanks, Kyle. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that was my pal Kyle Anslone, and I apologize. I'm getting a little bit of a headache, so if I seem a little off kilter, that would be it. So we're going to switch to Rumble, by the way. We also have another guest coming up. My friend Andy Worthington is here, but we do have a couple chats that I need to read out. So let me pull those up. So Natalie Williams, $5. Congrats on the host job. Thank you. I'm not doing a very good job today. My head's a little crazy right now. My t-shirt says 45 plus 45 is 125. It's a gym joke. The weights and the barbell. I actually had on a Smashing Pumpkins t-shirt right before we went on air, and I realized that there's green on it. And so when I leaned back, you could see like my green screen, like my shirt was blending in. So I had to go change really quick. I didn't realize it. Jive Talker, it's so brave of you to solo sub for JD. Dude, it's super intimidating. I'm sorry that I am a little off kilter. I did much better last time. I get random headaches all the time. But yeah, it's super intimidating to host for Jimmy Dore, obviously. It's very cool that he lets just some chick from Ohio host a show. That's very kind of him. P. Walker, let's face it, 1 billion in NATO military supplies amounts to a dozen boxes. Yeah, it's like some staplers, right? A pallet of expired MREs. Yeah, I mean, we spent like $1,000 on a hammer. So I knew Kurt's backdrop was fake. I saw a couple of those comments when Kyle was talking, and it was hard for me not to laugh because I didn't really make the connection until I saw it. And then I was like, so they live together. Keg, promote solution, gossip about news, not psyop. No, we do solutions all the time. I highly recommend my friend Derek Bros, the opt out and build. I've been trying to do some of that stuff. That's always good. But there's lots of stuff we can do. We don't have to just take this shit. We really don't. I think that might be it for now. Oh, Luke Harding. Thank you. That's the guy I was talking about that did the interview with Aaron Matei on the book Collusion. That's, if you haven't seen that, I'm embarrassed to say that I have watched that interview a lot of times. It's one of my favorite interviews ever. One of my favorite pieces of television or streaming or whatever ever. It was so fantastic watching that interview. That was great. Okay, so listen, we're going to switch to Rumble, Rumble only, and then we're going to bring my friend Andy Worthington in. Hopefully, I don't think he's here quite yet. But if not, we've got plenty of stories to discuss. So head over to Rumble and we'll see you there.
Hey, what if your coffee didn't just wake you up, but actually made you feel sharp, focused, and ready for the day? That's the difference with 1775's Pea Berry coffee. These beans are rare, less than 5% of all coffee grown. They're denser, naturally higher in caffeine, and packed with antioxidants. That means more mental clarity, better energy, and zero crash. Each bean grows so low, high in the Bolivian mountains, and it's hand-picked at peak ripeness. The result? A smoother, more concentrated flavor that kickstarts your metabolism without the acidity or jitters. How can they pull that off? You're still getting 1775's organic, small batch, small farm, single origin quality, just with the bean that goes above and beyond. So go to 1775coffee.com/door to save 15% off your order of 1775 coffee. It's coffee that actually earns its place in your morning.